The Elder Scrolls series has some of the most complex, powerful, and downright terrifying women in gaming history, and a surprising number of them were somebody's wife. From living goddesses to vampire royalty to assassins you can literally marry yourself, today we're breaking down every wife in Elder Scrolls and the stories behind them, starting with a woman who was worshipped as a god for over 3,000 years. Almalexia, 3,500 years. That's how long Almalexia sat on her throne in Mournhold, worshipped as a living goddess by the entire Dunmer people. Generations were born, lived, and died, never knowing a world without her. She wielded Hope's Fire, a blade that could cut through almost anything, and possessed powers that ranged from mass healing to summoning Daedra on command. Her people didn't just respect her, they loved her like a mother. But here's the thing, she was never actually a god. Every ounce of divine power Almalexia ever had was stolen from the heart of Lorkhan, borrowed power. And when that connection started weakening over the centuries, she didn't accept it gracefully. She shattered. The woman who once stood beside her husband Nerevar, as he unified an entire civilization, slowly became consumed by paranoia, clinging to a godhood that was draining out of her like water through cracks in stone. Some fans see her as genuinely tragic, a woman who may have truly loved Nerevar, who served her people for millennia, and simply couldn't survive losing the only identity she'd known. Others say the godhood was always a con, and she was a tyrant from day one. The game supports both readings equally, and that's exactly what makes her compelling. What's not ambiguous is how her story ends. When the Nerevarine arrives, the prophesied reincarnation of her dead husband Almalexia doesn't bow. She doesn't weep. She tries to kill you. Worship curdled into murder. That's the legacy of Morrowind's Divine Mother. But Almalexia wasn't the only queen in Elder Scrolls history whose love life shaped an entire province. Queen Berenzia. Most wives in Elder Scrolls exist in one game. Berenzia spans several. She shows up across multiple titles and in-game book series stretching from the Second Era well into the Third, making her one of the most referenced female characters in the entire franchise. And her story is way more interesting than most players realize. Here's the thing about Berenzia. She's a Dunmer queen who ended up ruling in High Rock, a province defined by backstabbing, shifting alliances, and nobles who would sell their own mothers for a better trade agreement. Her marriage to King Edwire of Wayrest wasn't some fairy tale romance. It was a political arrangement, plain and simple. A calculated move designed to manage succession and keep High Rock from tearing itself apart in yet another civil war. But here's where it gets interesting. That arranged marriage didn't make her a puppet. Berenzia operated as a genuine political player in one of the most cutthroat courts in all of Tamriel. She wasn't sitting on a throne looking pretty while advisors ran things behind her back. She was embedded in the court intrigues of High Rock, functioning as a central node of power in a region where alliances shifted by the week. The in-game book series, The Real Berenzia, paints a picture of someone who understood that political marriage could be both a cage and a weapon. She was placed on that throne through arrangement, but she wielded the position like someone who earned it. And the fact that Bethesda kept bringing her back across multiple games and multiple decades of real-world releases tells you everything. They clearly considered her too significant to leave behind in one title. But if you think a politically arranged marriage in High Rock sounds complicated, wait until you meet a queen who tried to unite three entirely different races under one banner. Queen Ayrenn. Most people hear Aldmeri Dominion and immediately think of the Thalmor. You know, the supremacist elves from Skyrim, who want to unmake reality and treat every non-Altmer like dirt. But the Dominion wasn't always like that, and the proof is Queen Ayrenn. Ayrenn Arana Aldmeri was the High Queen of the Aldmeri Dominion during the Second Era, around 2E 580, and she was basically the opposite of everything the Thalmor would eventually become. Here's the thing that makes her stand out immediately. She spoke Bosmerus, Khajiit, and Orcish. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. A high elf queen learning the languages of races her own people considered beneath them. That one detail tells you everything about how she governed. But the real story is what she did before she ever sat on the throne. Ayrenn disguised herself as a common adventurer and spent years traveling beyond her own kingdom incognito. No royal guard, no title. Just a woman walking through the lives of ordinary people to understand what ruling them actually meant. She didn't want to perform power. She wanted to earn it through understanding, and that philosophy shaped everything. Her diplomatic relationships with Wood Elf and Khajiit leaders forged an Aldmeri alliance that wasn't built on Altmer dominance. It was built on genuine cooperation. That was radical. Nobody had done that before, which makes her death around 2E583 hit differently. ESO players still debate whether it was narratively necessary or just cruel, because without Aeryn, the Dominion eventually collapsed back into exactly the kind of elven supremacy she fought against. The Thalmor you hate in Skyrim? They're what happens when someone like Aeryn is removed from the equation. She proved a better version of the Dominion was possible, and then the lore killed her anyway. But if Aeryn's story feels tragic, it's nothing compared to the woman who made tragedy her entire identity, Potema Septim. Potema Septim might be the most dangerous woman in Elder Scrolls history, and the wildest part? The game barely gives her the credit she deserves. Here's what we know. Potema was born around 3E67 and died in 3E137 during the Siege of Solitude, which means this woman spent roughly 70 years scheming, manipulating, and waging outright war against the Imperial throne. She wasn't just some rogue noble throwing a tantrum. She commanded armies. She deployed blood magic, necromancy, and Daedric forces against the Empire itself. The War of the Red Diamond alone lasted about 17 years of pure military rebellion. That's not a political disagreement. That's a full-scale supernatural war. And for her trouble, she earned the title the Wolf Queen of Solitude, which honestly sounds more like a reward than a punishment. But here's where it gets really interesting. Potema didn't stay dead. Centuries after her physical death, her ghost shows up in Skyrim's Wolfskull Cave questline, where a group of necromancers is actively trying to resurrect her. And even as a spirit, she could cast destruction spells and summon creatures. Her magical power literally outlived her body. That's not a normal ghost. That's a force of nature refusing to be forgotten. And yet, how does Skyrim remember her? Loading screen tips, guard dialogue, a couple of dusty books. She commanded Daedric forces and bent an entire province to her will, and the game treats her like a historical footnote. That's because Imperial history wrote the story, and the Empire won. This is where the community debate gets genuinely fascinating. Stormcloak's sympathetic players have reframed Potema's rebellion not as treason, but as an early Solitude independence movement. Sound familiar? The same arguments Ulfric makes centuries later, Potema was making with armies and necromancy. Whether she was a monster or a freedom fighter depends entirely on who's telling the story. And in Tamriel, the winners always hold the pen. But if a dead queen commanding Daedric armies sounds intense, wait until you meet a wife who hunts with werewolf blood running through her veins. Ela the Huntress. Most marriage candidates in Skyrim feel like they're waiting for you. Ela the Huntress was never waiting for anyone. She's one of the oldest active members of the Companions, having carried Hircine's lycanthropy for decades before you ever set foot in Jorrvaskr. And here's the thing that separates her from basically every other spouse in the game. Her werewolf blood isn't something she tolerates. It's not a burden she's learning to live with. She actively defends it. She chose it. She keeps choosing it. And if you try to cure her, she refuses. That's her identity, not her affliction. Mechanically, she backs it up. Ayla's level scales dynamically with yours, all the way up to a cap of 50, which makes her one of the strongest followers in the entire game. She runs Radiant hunting contracts across every hold in Skyrim, fights alongside you through the entire Companion's questline, and uses archery with genuine competence. She wasn't designed as a spouse who happens to fight. She was designed as a fighter who happens to be marriageable. But the detail that divides the fanbase more than anything else is simple. Ayla refuses to have children after marriage. No adoption, no family expansion, and players lose their minds over this. Some call it a design oversight. Others call it the most honest character writing in the game. Here's what both sides miss. Ayla is the only marriage candidate who makes it unmistakably clear that she's choosing you, not settling into a domestic role because the questline ended. And then there's Skjor. Her relationship with him is never fully explained. The game leaves it deliberately ambiguous, somewhere between deep loyalty and something more. Even after you marry her, Ayla still defends Skjor's honor in dialogue. She doesn't erase her past just because she started a future with you. That's rare. Most Skyrim spouses feel like they spawned into existence the moment you handed them an amulet of Mara. Ayla feels like she had a life before you and kept it after. But if you want a spouse who fights just as hard and comes with even more complicated baggage, wait until you meet Mjoll, Mjoll the Lioness. Mjoll is the marriage candidate who makes sense on paper. She has a code. She has a nemesis. She hates the Thieves Guild, says it out loud, and never wavers. In a game where half the NPCs are morally gray at best, Mjoll is a straight line, and that's exactly why so many players gravitate toward her. Her backstory is genuinely rough. She nearly died fighting a dwarven centurion deep inside the ruins of Mzinchileft, lost her beloved sword Grimsever in the process, and would have bled out on the stone floor if Eren hadn't found her and nursed her back to health. Instead of leaving Riften after recovering, she learned about the corruption strangling the city and turned that knowledge into a personal crusade against its criminal underbelly. She's one of the only marriage candidates in the entire game who names a specific enemy, not a vague grudge, not a passing complaint. The Thieves Guild is her target, and she says so to anyone who'll listen. But here's where it gets interesting. Her AI pathfinding actually takes her into Thieves Guild territory around Riften. The game creates this ongoing friction between Mjoll and the organization she despises, but it never resolves it. There's no quest where she storms the Ragged Flagon, no confrontation, no payoff, just a warrior walking circles around the thing she hates most. Then there's Eren. This Imperial man in Riften saved her life, and he clearly developed feelings for her, strong ones. He follows her around, hovers near her, and some players report his behavior shifts noticeably after you marry Mjoll. It's one of the quietest, most human details in Skyrim's entire marriage system, an unrequited love story playing out in the background of yours. And that's really Mjoll's problem. She's a personality sketch, not a full character, no major questline, no deep narrative arc. Her characterization is built almost entirely from scattered dialogue and player projection. You fill in the blanks because the game doesn't. She's simultaneously one of the easiest wives to love and one of the hardest to truly know, which makes her the perfect contrast to a wife who might be the most fully realized character Bethesda has ever written, Serana. Let's talk about a character who makes every other entry on this list look like a footnote. Serana is ancient. The exact timeline is debated, but she's been sealed away since at least the Second Era, making her well over 1,000 years old by the time the Dragonborn cracks open that sarcophagus in the Dawnguard DLC. 1,000 years. She has outlived empires, wars, and entire civilizations. Every other wife candidate on this list has maybe a few decades of backstory. Serana has millennia, and she's not just old, she's royalty. Her father is Lord Harkon of Volkihar Castle, and her mother is Valerica, one of the most powerful vampires in Tamriel's history. Serana herself wields Daedric weapons, necromantic spells, invisibility, and can summon Daedric entities mid-combat. Mechanically, she's one of the most capable companions in the entire game. She doesn't need you, that's the point. But here's where it gets dark. Serana didn't choose any of this. Her father, Lord Harkon, made a deal with Molag Bal and had his entire family offered up in a ritual to become pure-blooded vampires. Her own father turned her into a monster to serve his ambitions. Her mother, Valerica, eventually fled with Serana and sealed her away specifically to protect her from Harkon's plans. She's simultaneously one of the most powerful beings you'll ever meet, and one of the most victimized characters in the franchise. That tension is what makes her work. Bethesda gave Serana hundreds of unique voiced lines with branching dialogue based on your choices throughout Dawnguard. She reacts to your decisions, challenges your reasoning, and develops a relationship with the player that no other companion in Skyrim even comes close to matching. She is, without question, the most narratively developed companion in the game, and arguably in the entire series up to that point. And that's exactly why the community debate around her has never stopped. Does Serana genuinely love the Dragonborn? Or is this a trauma bond between two people who survived something terrible together? The game never answers that question, deliberately. That ambiguity has fueled over a decade of fan discussion, and it's not shallow shipping discourse. It's a real conversation about what emotional connection looks like after 1,000 years of suffering. Here's the kicker. Serana is not marriageable without mods, and most players understood that wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. A character with her history, her trauma, her complexity probably shouldn't resolve into a house in Whiterun and a daily income of 100 gold. Some characters are too big for that system. But if Serana represents the ceiling of companion writing in Skyrim, the next entry might represent the floor, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Ysolda. After everything we just covered with Serana, 4,000 years of vampiric royalty, Daedric sacrifices, and world-ending prophecies, let's talk about a woman who just wants to sell stuff. Ysolda is a Nord trader living in Whiterun, and her entire character can be summed up in one sentence. She has a dream, and absolutely zero means of achieving it. That's it. no divine blood, no ancient curse, no rebellion. She wants to save up enough money to buy the Bannered Mare Inn right there in Whiterun and run it as her own business. And the game never lets her do it. Here's what makes her quietly interesting though. Isolde has a working relationship with the Khajiit caravans that camp outside Whiterun's walls. Not just as a customer, but as something closer to a liaison. She actively trades with them and learns their bartering techniques, which is unusual because most Nords in Skyrim treat the Khajiit merchants like second-class citizens. The fact that she's embedded herself in their trade network suggests someone with more ambition and street smarts than her modest position in the Whiterun marketplace would indicate. But that's exactly where the tension lives. Isolde talks like someone who's about to do something significant. Her dialogue is all forward-looking, all plans and aspirations. She discusses saving money, learning negotiation tactics, building connections. She sounds like someone on the verge of a major life change. And then, nothing happens. The game gives her 0 quest lines to fulfill those ambitions. She stands in the same spot in Whiterun, day after day, talking about a future that the game's mechanics will never deliver. As a marriage candidate, her value to the player is explicitly economic rather than martial. She's not swinging a sword or casting spells. She's a merchant. She brings bartering skills and a shop income to the household. Isolde represents what most people in Tamriel actually are. Not Dragonborn, not vampires, not legendary warriors. Just someone with plans, and no particular destiny pushing them forward. Sometimes the most realistic character is the one who never gets their moment. But if you think Isolde's story has complicated undertones, wait until you meet a woman whose entire romance is built on a foundation of contract killing. Muri. You have to kill people to marry this woman. That's not subtext. That's not a fan theory. That's the actual quest structure. Muri is a Breton alchemist working at the Hag's Cure in Markarth, and she is the only marriage candidate in Skyrim whose romance is explicitly gated behind commissioning and completing Dark Brotherhood assassination contracts. You walk into a shop, meet a grief-stricken woman, and the path to her heart runs directly through 2 corpses. The game presents this as a romance questline and never flinches. But here's the thing. If you actually listen to Muri, her motivations make sense. She was betrayed. She was used. And in a world where the legal system is a joke, and Markarth is already drowning in conspiracy and forsworn violence, her decision to seek revenge through the Dark Brotherhood isn't irrational. It's desperate. The branching nature of her questline, which touches on the forsworn conspiracy and the political rot underneath Markarth, gives her story more structural depth than most marriage candidates ever receive. She's not a cardboard cutout waiting at a market stall. She's a person who made a terrible choice and is asking you to make it with her. And that's what makes the community debate around Muri so interesting. It splits on exactly the right fault line. One side sees her as a genuine character study in how grief and betrayal can twist someone's moral compass beyond recognition. The other side sees her as a design choice that normalizes romantic reward for completing murders. Her agency is defined entirely by revenge, not by choice. The game hands you the contract, hands you the reward, and offers 0 commentary on what just happened. No NPC judges you. No consequence triggers. You killed 2 people for a woman's affection, and Skyrim says congratulations. Here's an Amulet of Mara dialogue option. She's level 10 at the point of marriage eligibility. Uses restoration magic and alchemy in combat. Practically made of glass. The contrast between her fragility and the brutality required to unlock her as a spouse is deliberate, and it's unsettling whether Bethesda intended it to be or not. Muri is what happens when a marriage system has absolutely no ethical scaffolding. The game will marry you to someone whose affection is contingent on body count, and it never blinks. No moral check. No reputation gate. No moment where the game asks if you're sure about this. Whether that's realism or oversight depends entirely on how much credit you give Bethesda. But either way, Muri is the most honest version of what Skyrim's marriage system actually is. A transaction. Complete the task. Receive the reward. She just happens to be the only wife who makes you confront what that transaction really costs. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every race in Elder Scrolls explained, click the video on the screen now.